In 1513, Niccolò Machiavelli documented 5 manipulation techniques so psychologically powerful that modern psychology still struggles to explain how they bypass human rational thinking completely. These weren't theoretical concepts. Machiavelli had spent years observing how Renaissance princes controlled entire populations, manipulated enemies into allies, and made people beg for their own subjugation. He recorded these techniques in secret manuscripts that he never intended to publish. But here's what terrifies modern psychologists. These 5 techniques work on a neurological level that predates logical thinking by millions of years. They target the primitive brain systems that evolved for survival, not for resisting sophisticated manipulation. When Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved," he wasn't giving moral advice. He was revealing the first of 5 psychological mechanisms that make humans predictably controllable. Steve Jobs used all 5 techniques to create Apple's cult-like following. Political campaigns deploy them every election cycle. Your boss probably uses at least 3 of them without realizing it. Even people who think they're immune to manipulation fall victim to these techniques because they operate below conscious awareness. The reason psychology fears you'll learn these isn't because they're morally questionable. It's because once you understand how they work, you become impossible to manipulate. You start seeing the strings behind every interaction, every advertisement, every relationship dynamic. Machiavelli himself warned, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are." Here's what's going to happen in the next 20 minutes. I'm going to reveal Machiavelli's 5 manipulation techniques that psychology textbooks won't teach you. Not just what they are, but the precise neurological mechanisms that make them impossible to resist, and how to recognize them before they're used on you. So let me ask you, are you ready to see what others can't? Or are you going to keep pretending you're not being manipulated every single day? Before I reveal Machiavelli's first technique, you need to understand what happened when he discovered these psychological principles. Because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see every conversation, every advertisement, and every relationship for the rest of your life. In 1512, Machiavelli was imprisoned and tortured by the Medici family after they regained power in Florence. During his captivity, he witnessed something that would revolutionize his understanding of human psychology. His captors were using specific techniques to break down prisoners that had nothing to do with physical pain. Here's the shocking part. These techniques worked on everyone. Intelligent people, strong-willed people, people who thought they were psychologically resilient. They all broke down in predictable patterns. Machiavelli realized he was observing the systematic exploitation of universal human psychological vulnerabilities. Weaknesses that every person possesses because they're hardwired into our survival programming. This is what modern psychology doesn't want you to understand. You're not being manipulated because you're weak or stupid. You're being manipulated because you're human. Your brain evolved over millions of years to respond instantly to certain triggers without conscious analysis. When a lion was charging at your ancestor, there wasn't time for rational thought. The brain developed shortcuts, rapid response patterns that bypass logic completely. Machiavelli discovered that these same survival shortcuts could be triggered artificially to control human behavior. Not through force or obvious coercion, but through psychological techniques that feel natural, even helpful. Think about the last time you bought something you didn't plan to buy, or agreed to something you didn't want to do, or found yourself believing information that you later realized was questionable. You probably thought you made those decisions rationally. You didn't. Your primitive brain was responding to manipulation techniques that Machiavelli identified 500 years ago. Steve Jobs understood this intuitively. When he revealed the iPhone, he didn't just present features. He used Machiavellian principles to create psychological dependency. Every one more thing was calculated to trigger specific neural responses. Political campaigns have turned these techniques into science. They don't try to convince you with logic. They use Machiavellian methods to make you feel like voting for their candidate was your own idea. But here's where it gets disturbing. Most people using these techniques don't even realize they're doing it. They've absorbed Machiavellian principles through culture, training, and trial and error, without understanding the psychological mechanisms they're exploiting. Now, here's Machiavelli's first technique that psychology desperately hopes you never learn to recognize. Machiavelli's first manipulation technique is what I call the velvet glove, the art of making force feel like kindness. In 1502, Machiavelli witnessed Cesare Borgia use this technique to control the city of Rimini. Instead of conquering through obvious violence, Borgia offered protection from other threats. The citizens begged him to station troops in their city, thinking they were getting security when they were actually surrendering their freedom. Here's the neurological mechanism that makes the velvet glove impossible to resist. It exploits what psychologists call reciprocity bias, combined with threat amplification. Your brain is hardwired to feel indebted to anyone who helps you during a crisis. This evolved because humans who helped each other during dangerous situations were more likely to survive. But Machiavelli discovered you could artificially create the crisis, then position yourself as the solution. The technique works in 3 precise steps. First, subtle threat introduction. The manipulator doesn't create obvious danger. They make you aware of problems you hadn't noticed. I've been thinking about your situation, and I'm worried about, or you know what could happen if, or I'd hate to see you get hurt by. Your brain's threat detection system activates immediately. Even if the danger is vague or unlikely, your primitive survival programming treats all potential threats as immediate and serious. Second, solution positioning. The manipulator presents themselves as uniquely capable of protecting you from the threat they just introduced. Fortunately, I have experience with this exact situation. Or, I know someone who can help. Or, I've developed a system that prevents. This triggers what neuroscientists call the relief response, a flood of positive emotions when perceived danger is removed. Your brain literally rewards you with good feelings for accepting their protection. Third, dependency creation. The manipulator ensures you need ongoing help, not just one-time assistance. This requires constant monitoring, or the situation could change quickly, or you'll need ongoing support to stay safe. Your brain interprets this ongoing relationship as evidence that the manipulator genuinely cares about your welfare. The longer the protection continues, the more indebted and dependent you feel. Steve Jobs mastered this technique completely. Apple didn't just sell computers. They created awareness of technology threats, viruses, complexity, incompatibility, then positioned themselves as the elegant solution. Apple users don't just buy products, they feel rescued by them. Insurance companies built entire industries on the velvet glove. They don't sell insurance. They sell peace of mind about dangers you might not have worried about until they mentioned them. Toxic relationships often revolve around this dynamic. One partner constantly identifies threats to the relationship, then positions themselves as the only person who truly understands and protects the other person. Here's how to recognize the velvet glove in action. Pay attention to conversations where someone makes you aware of a problem immediately before offering to solve it. Especially if the problem wasn't bothering you before they mentioned it. Ask yourself, was I worried about this issue before this conversation started? If the answer is no, you're probably experiencing manufactured crisis and artificial rescue. But the velvet glove is just Machiavelli's opening move. His second technique is even more psychologically sophisticated, and it explains why intelligent people often make the worst decisions when they're emotional. In 1503, Machiavelli observed something that would become his most psychologically devastating discovery. He watched as Cesare Borgia manipulated the Pope himself, not through theology or politics, but by controlling the emotional state in which important decisions were made. Machiavelli's second technique is emotional anchoring, the systematic manipulation of feelings to bypass rational judgment completely. Here's the neurological mechanism. Your brain makes different decisions depending on your emotional state when the choice is presented. When you're anxious, you choose safety over opportunity. When you're excited, you choose immediate rewards over long-term benefits. When you're grateful, you choose to reciprocate, regardless of logic. Machiavelli realized that controlling someone's emotional state was more powerful than controlling the information they received. The technique works through 3 psychological phases. First, emotional state creation. The manipulator doesn't wait for you to naturally feel the emotion they need, they engineer it. This might involve triggering anxiety through time pressure, excitement through exclusive opportunities, or gratitude through unexpected kindness. Borgia would arrive at negotiations after keeping the other party waiting just long enough to create slight anxiety, then open with surprising generosity to shift them into grateful relief. The emotional transition made them far more agreeable to his proposals. Second, decision timing. The manipulator presents their request at the peak of the engineered emotional state. Not before you feel the emotion, not after it fades, exactly when the feeling is strongest and most likely to override logical analysis. This exploits what neuroscientists call affective decision-making, your brain's tendency to let current emotions determine choices, even when those emotions have nothing to do with the actual decision. Third, anchor reinforcement. The manipulator strengthens the emotional association by referencing how good the decision made you feel. You seemed so relieved when we decided, or I could see how excited you were about, or remember how confident you felt when. Your brain interprets these positive emotional memories as evidence that the decision was correct, making you more likely to make similar choices in the future. Steve Jobs used emotional anchoring in every product launch. The careful build-up of anticipation, the dramatic reveals, the immediate call to action while excitement peaked. None of this was accidental. Apple customers weren't just buying products during emotional highs. They were creating positive emotional memories about the purchase process itself. Political campaigns deploy this technique systematically. Rally up strong emotions about problems, then present their candidate as the solution while feelings are running high. The decision to vote feels emotional and right, even if the logical case is weak. Sales professionals learn this as emotional selling. Create feelings first, present options second, ask for commitment while emotions are peaked. Toxic relationships often revolve around emotional manipulation. One person learns to trigger specific emotional states in their partner, then makes requests or establishes new relationship rules while those emotions are strongest. Here's how to recognize emotional anchoring. Notice when someone tries to create strong emotions before asking for something. Pay attention to timing. Are requests coming right after emotional conversations, surprise gifts, or anxiety-inducing discussions? Ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? And is this feeling related to the actual decision I'm being asked to make? But emotional manipulation is subtle compared to Machiavelli's third technique, which literally rewires how you perceive reality itself. In 1506, Machiavelli documented the most psychologically dangerous technique he ever witnessed. He watched as Pope Julius II convinced an entire city that war was peace, that destruction was progress, and that their suffering was actually victory. Machiavelli called this controlling the narrative, but what he really discovered was reality distortion, the systematic manipulation of perception to make people believe their experiences mean something completely different than what actually happened. Here's the neurological mechanism that makes this technique terrifying. Your brain doesn't store objective memories. It stores interpreted memories. Every time you recall an event, Your brain slightly rewrites it based on your current understanding and emotional state. Machiavelli realized that if you could control how someone interpreted their experiences, you could literally reshape their understanding of reality. The technique operates through 3 psychological phases. First, interpretation framing. The manipulator doesn't deny what happened. They provide a compelling explanation for why it happened. This setback is actually preparation for something better. Or, what feels like rejection is really protection. Or, this difficulty is proof you're on the right path. Your brain prefers coherent narratives over random events. When someone offers a meaningful interpretation of confusing experiences, your mind naturally adopts that framework to make sense of what happened. Second, selective emphasis. The manipulator highlights certain aspects of your experience while minimizing others. They focus intensely on evidence that supports their interpretation while treating contradictory evidence as unimportant or irrelevant. This exploits what psychologists call confirmation bias, your brain's tendency to notice and remember information that supports existing beliefs while filtering out contradictory data. Third, reality reinforcement. The manipulator consistently refers back to their interpretation as if it's established fact. As we discovered when you experienced, or like you realized during, or remember when you learned that. Your brain interprets this consistency as evidence of truth. The more often you hear the same interpretation, the more real it becomes in your memory. Steve Jobs mastered reality distortion so completely that employees named it the reality distortion field. Jobs could convince people that impossible deadlines were exciting challenges, that missing features were elegant simplicity, and that technical limitations were design choices. Abusive relationships often depend on reality distortion. The abuser systematically reinterprets the victim's experiences. Your emotional reactions become overreactions. Their harmful behavior becomes your fault. Your desire for respect becomes unrealistic expectations. Political movements use this technique to maintain loyalty despite contradictory evidence. When policies fail, the failure is reinterpreted as proof of external interference, incomplete implementation, or the need for more extreme measures. Cults perfect reality distortion by creating closed information environments where only approved interpretations are available. Members' doubts are reframed as spiritual tests, their discomfort as purification, their desire to leave as weakness. Corporate environments often employ subtle reality distortion. Layoffs become right-sizing, wage stagnation becomes investment in company growth, increased workload becomes opportunity for professional development. Here's how to recognize reality distortion. Pay attention when someone consistently provides interpretations of your experiences that benefit them while dismissing your own understanding of what happened. Ask yourself, am I being told what my experiences mean rather than being allowed to decide for myself? Trust your original emotional reactions before someone explains why you should feel differently. But reality distortion requires sustained contact. Machiavelli's fourth technique is even more insidious because it can manipulate you using people you've never even met. In 1508, Machiavelli witnessed the most psychologically elegant manipulation he ever recorded. He watched Lorenzo de' Medici control an entire population without speaking to most of them directly. Instead, Lorenzo manipulated a few key influencers, then let human psychology do the rest. Machiavelli's fourth technique is social proof weaponization, turning humanity's most fundamental survival instinct against itself. Here's the neurological mechanism. Your brain evolved to copy the behavior of your social group because humans who stayed with the tribe survived, while humans who acted independently often died. This copying instinct is so powerful, it operates before conscious thought. Machiavelli discovered you could exploit this by controlling what people believe everyone else is thinking, feeling, or doing. The technique works through three calculated phases. First, influence concentration. The manipulator doesn't try to convince everyone. They focus intensely on people who others naturally watch and copy. These might be formal leaders, popular personalities, or simply individuals who others respect and imitate. Lorenzo de' Medici would invite respected citizens to private dinners where he'd share his perspective on political issues. These people would then naturally discuss these ideas in their own social circles, presenting them as their own thoughts rather than Lorenzo's propaganda. Second, consensus amplification. The manipulator makes their position appear more popular than it actually is by ensuring that influenced voices are disproportionately visible and vocal. Meanwhile, dissenting opinions are isolated or discouraged from public expression. This creates what psychologists call pluralistic ignorance. Most people privately disagree with the apparent consensus, but assume they're alone in their disagreement. Third, bandwagon acceleration. As more people publicly adopt the manipulated position, even reluctantly, it becomes easier for others to join because the social proof appears increasingly legitimate. Your brain interprets this growing consensus as evidence of truth, regardless of how the consensus was artificially created. Steve Jobs used social proof weaponization brilliantly. Apple created carefully curated communities of early adopters who would evangelize products to their networks. These weren't paid spokespeople. They were customers who genuinely believed in Apple products and naturally influenced others through authentic enthusiasm. Political campaigns deploy this technique through astroturfing, creating the appearance of grassroots support through coordinated messaging across multiple platforms. They don't need to convince everyone directly. They just need to make their position appear more popular than it actually is. Social media platforms accidentally perfected social proof weaponization through likes, shares, and trending algorithms. You're not just seeing information, you're seeing what appears to be popular information, which your brain interprets as socially approved thinking. Corporate culture often relies on this technique. New employees quickly learn how things are done here, not through formal training, but by observing what behaviors get rewarded, what opinions get expressed, and what actions make people popular or isolated. Marketing departments use social proof explicitly, showing testimonials, user counts, and social media engagement to make products appear more popular and trusted than they might actually be. Here's how to recognize social proof weaponization. Notice when you're being told what most people think, especially when you haven't personally observed this consensus. Pay attention to whether dissenting opinions are actively discouraged or simply absent. Ask yourself, am I seeing authentic social proof, or am I seeing carefully curated examples designed to influence my behavior? But even social proof weaponization requires time to build momentum. Machiavelli's fifth and most devastating technique can control your behavior immediately using nothing but your own imagination. Machiavelli's fifth and most psychologically devastating technique is future fear, using your imagination against you to create compliance in the present. In 1510, Machiavelli observed how effective rulers controlled populations not by threatening immediate punishment, but by making people terrify themselves with possibilities of what could happen. Here's the neurological mechanism. Your brain can't distinguish between vividly imagined futures and actual memories. When you imagine a threatening scenario in detail, your body produces the same stress response as if the threat were real and immediate. The technique works through anticipation engineering. The manipulator plants specific scenarios in your mind, then lets your imagination amplify the fear far beyond what they could create through direct threats. I'd hate for you to end up like, or, you know what happens to people who, or, I'm worried you might find yourself in a situation where. Your brain immediately begins constructing detailed mental scenarios about these possibilities. The more vividly you imagine the negative outcomes, the more real and probable they feel. Steve Jobs used future fear by making people imagine technological obsolescence. You weren't just buying an iPhone, you were avoiding the embarrassment and inconvenience of being left behind by technological progress. Insurance industries built their entire business model on future fear. They don't sell protection, they sell relief from imagined catastrophes that your mind makes feel inevitable. Toxic relationships often center on future fear. No one else will ever love you like I do, forces you to imagine a future of loneliness and rejection, making the current relationship feel like your only option for avoiding that fate. Here's how to recognize future fear. Notice when conversations shift from present reality to hypothetical scenarios, especially when those scenarios involve loss, embarrassment, or isolation. Ask yourself, am I making this decision based on what's actually happening, or based on what I'm imagining might happen? Now, here's what Machiavelli never told anyone about using all 5 techniques together. So here we are. You now understand Machiavelli's 5 manipulation techniques that psychology fears you'll learn. The velvet glove, making force feel like kindness through manufactured crisis and artificial rescue. Emotional anchoring, controlling the feelings present when decisions are made to bypass rational judgment. Reality distortion, systematically reinterpreting experiences to reshape someone's understanding of what happened. Social proof weaponization, using humanity's copying instinct to create artificial consensus and bandwagon effects. Future fear, weaponizing imagination to create present compliance through anticipated consequences. Steve Jobs mastered all 5 and built the world's most valuable company. Political movements combine all 5 to control populations. Toxic individuals use all 5 to manipulate relationships. But here's what I haven't revealed yet. These techniques only work when you don't understand the specific psychological countermeasures Machiavelli developed for defending against them. Most people try to resist manipulation through willpower or logic. But Machiavelli understood that these techniques bypass conscious reasoning entirely. You need different defensive strategies, ones that work on the same neurological level as the attacks themselves. There's also something Machiavelli wrote about what he called the manipulator's dilemma, the psychological trap that people fall into when they become skilled at these techniques, and how it ultimately destroys their ability to form genuine relationships. These are the insights I reveal in my next video, where I break down Machiavelli's secret psychological defense system, the methods he developed for protecting yourself without becoming manipulative yourself. The question is, are you ready to become psychologically sovereign, or will you keep pretending these techniques aren't being used on you every day? Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension. If you're ready to continue this journey, subscribe and check out my video on Jung's 3 hidden laws, where I reveal how deep thinkers naturally resist these manipulation techniques.